Okay, welcome to the Evolvepreneur Podcast Channel. One of my very special guests today is Mike Rhodes, who's the CEO and founder of AgencySavvy and WebSavvy. I've actually spoken to Mike a few times. I've seen him talk, so I've basically got a bit of an idea what he actually is all about. He's co-author of a best-selling book, Google Ads, on the ultimate guide to Google Ads. His award-winning digital marketing agency, WebSavvy, is based in Melbourne, Australia. Since 2006, Mike and his team have been running campaigns for brands around the globe, and it's now one of Australia's largest independent Google agencies. Mike's passion for the future of AI and machine learning, which is quite an interesting one. I think I remember seeing him talk about that one, has invited him to speak at over 100 events around the world, including traffic conversion summits, baby bathwater, interesting, digital summit Moscow, that would have been interesting as well. A teacher at heart, Mike is passionate about agency savvy community and helping agencies owners do Google Ads better and scale their agencies. So welcome, Mike, to the show.
Thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me on.
It's always good to have an Aussie on the show. I do quite a lot of Americans and Canadians and stuff like that, so it's always good to have an Aussie.
It's nice to do a podcast at a sensible time of day. Yeah.
They all seem typically from Melbourne for some reason. I don't know. I think Melbourne must be the hub of all this.
Must be the coffee.
Yeah, it must be the coffee for sure. So give me a little bit of background about you. Like, how did you get to where you got to? Because most people in IT, I think, have been traumatized at some point in their business, right? They started off something and they ended up somewhere else.
Completely by accident.
Yeah. So they used to get by accident there. So I certainly did. So how did you end up doing Google Ads?
I started off in aviation. So since the age of 6, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And
Gotcha.
I actually went and learned how to fly. I ended up working for the most prestigious helicopter company in Europe, working for this guy, Lord Hanson, good mates with the Queen. She was one of our clients, Princess Di, Bill Gates, Schumacher. It was an amazing place to be there. But very, very quickly, I figured out, talking to the other pilots there, that every single one of them couldn't wait to retire. They'd all come out of military. They'd all got 5,000-10,000 hours under their belt. They were being paid next to nothing. That may have been part of my reasoning, but also they never saw their bloody families. We would send them off to go pick up Tom Cruise at some weird place in the north of England, and they'd be literally sitting in a field until 5 a.m. waiting for filming to finish. Yep. They were basically just taxi drivers, and they referred to themselves as drivers in a nice taxi that can go up and down. So I worked out very quickly I didn't want to do that for a career, and I always knew I'd have my own business one day. I think we decide as kids we either want to be just like our parents or the exact opposite.
True.
My dad did the corporate thing. He worked for Xerox for 22 years, and I decided as a 9 or 10-year-old, like, I'm not doing that. I don't want to recall that. Seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I knew I wouldn't do that, but it wasn't until I left the UK, finished up with a helicopter company and left the UK, moved to New Zealand. I was on my way to Oz, but I got a bit sidetracked.
In the Kiwi land, yeah.
As many people do. Went for 3 weeks, stayed for 3 years. I started my first business.
They wouldn't let you out, right?
I didn't want to leave. It's so bloody beautiful. I was in Queenstown down the bottom. Okay. Beautiful being in the mountains.
So different in New Zealand. Every sort of, like, you drive a couple of 100K and it's totally different, right? It just changes so much.
You can drive a couple of 100K without seeing another car. Never mind a cop car, without seeing another car. So I've got a heavy right foot. I had a great time driving around the South Island. Lots of gravel roads back in the day. So like my rally driving got really, really good. I loved living there. I started my first business, built that up over about 18 months, sold that and moved to Sydney. And through a bizarre series of events, I ended up actually working with Michael Gerber, becoming an E-Myth coach and teaching businesses, because I've always loved the business of business. But I absolutely sucked at selling the E-Myth system into businesses, because I'd walk in with this system. It's 7 modules. Yeah.
I've read that book a few times.
It's a great book. It was the reason my first business was as successful as it was, and why I was able to sell it in 4 days, because it was systemized.
Yes.
Because I had a manual and a process for everything. But then I discovered this thing called an E-Myth coach, and I went and flew to America at 2 days' notice. I spent a ton of money with Michael Gerber and his team. That was my MBA in small business, incredibly valuable. But I sucked at selling this system, because I'd walk into someone's office, green, thinking I'm going to systemize their business, because I'm it in a bit. I've done what you're doing, right? With one business, 18 months, and that's me. I know everything. Yeah. And I'd walk in and they'd go, mate, I just need more customers. When we've got a module for that, module 5. Well, when do we get to module 5? Is it
18
like
months?
day 5, week 5? Yeah, 10 months. The typical
I
time
joined
is 10
him.
months.
That's exactly the question I asked them at the time. And they go, 18 months. And I'm going, no way.
And I got thrown out of that many offices because it's like, mate, just sell me module 5. I can't sell you module 5. It's a system. It's good, but we've got to do mindset and team and all this other stuff first. In hindsight, I realized the power of that for the right person, because most businesses, if you doubled their leads tomorrow, most businesses would break.
Yeah.
And they think that that's going to solve all the problems, but actually it just exposes all the other problems. And then in the midst of all that, I saw this guy, Perry Marshall, speak in 2004 at the now infamous X10 seminar in Coolum.
Okay, I vaguely remember that. Yeah.
Ari Galper was there, Frank Mullen was there, and the amazing speakers of like Alex Mandosian and Paul Colligan, and Perry was one of these
I met Alex
up on stage. Oh yeah,
on Gold Coast a couple of years ago.
It was like Declan Dunn. It was like the who's who of that era of internet marketing. Everybody was there. Simon lost a ton of money. The promoter lost a ton of money on this thing. There was a lady there from Overture speaking, and Perry was heckling her from the back of the room, saying like, but you manually check every ad. This is 2004. If I sell windscreens and there's a hailstorm, I need my ads to go live now. I can't have my ad go live in 3 to 5 business days. Your system sucks. And we're all giggling. We're like, what the hell's going on here? And then he spoke and told us about Google Ads. And I was just, oh my God, all these businesses that are throwing me out of their offices, this is what they want and need. This is the bit, right? To only show an ad to someone that's looking for what you sell, and to only pay if they're interested enough to click on your ad. And back then, all those clicks were 5-10 cents or something.
Yeah, they were cheap, eh?
It's pretty hard to get it wrong back then. No. But I went back to my mastermind, hair on fire, telling everybody I could about this. A mate of mine actually gave me half of his business. Said, I don't want you to consult. I'll give you half the business. Come in and do this with me. And we sold 100 grand worth of stuff in 3.5 weeks. And I went, oh my God, this AdWords stuff works.
Yeah.
That's what it was called back then, Google AdWords. And I would just try telling everybody about it. And 9 out of 10 people I told would say, mate, I don't want you to bloody tell me how it works. Just do it for me.
Yep.
And that's how the agency was basically built. I started doing it for people for a crate of beer or a round of golf, or, you know, and slowly that built, and people just go, would you please help me? I don't want to have to think about this in my business. Back then, if you could spell AdWords, that was special. Nobody has heard about it.
True.
And I did wander off and run someone else's business for a bit, because it gave me the chance to learn public speaking and to travel the world, which was fabulous. I loved that job for 18 months. And then I started the agency off the back of that, because I was talking to all of these businesses through that job. And same thing, I would always say, well, look, you know, like I'm here, I'm employed by these guys. I'm not here to step on their toes or to steal it. And I wish you bloody would, because we need what you've got. Like, ding. I had to be like, that had to be shouted at me a few times. Had to be belted on the back of the light bulb went, yeah, I really had to be belted on the back of the head before I went, oh, okay, I should probably set up an agency and offer this service for $397 a month. Woohoo. Which I thought was a fortune back then. And I still have my second ever client, Melbourne company, who believed in me back in 2006, 2007 when we were getting going. And they're still a client today, 15 years later. Yeah.
It's really funny. Like, I mean, talking about leads and stuff, I was talking to someone yesterday who was thinking about generating leads for a company, and we're sort of associated. And he said, yeah, I want to generate these leads because obviously these people need leads. And I said, no, they don't. I bet you. I said, they can't, because I know these people, they can't sell. So what's going to happen is you're going to generate all these leads. They will burn those leads, and then they're going to whinge not getting enough leads, valuable leads, quality leads. And it's because they're too bad at sales. So this is a big problem. You generate this bunch of leads to someone, they can't sell. Even if they did sell, they can't cope with increase. And so, yeah, they think they've got this problem, but the reality is it highlights a big other problem on the other end. Yep. But at least with something like Google AdWords, you can scale it up and down. You don't have a situation where suddenly you've got a problem where you've got, you know, if it's too much, well, then you can always scale back your ads and sort of slow it down.
And that's what I loved about it really early on, is it's just this tap. And I loved getting those phone calls from clients of, mate, I don't know what you're doing, but could you just slow it down a bit? Because the boys on the factory floor can't cope. We can't make the shower screens. We can't make the windows fast enough. Like, just dial it down. Not a problem. It's just, we'll dial that down. I love that. Ecom it's a bit easier. I'd say probably over half of our clients these days are e-com. We started very much in services. I mean, back then it was all lawyers and home builders and dentists. And these days, probably 60-65% is e-com, where you don't have to worry about that exact problem.
No.
And that rift between sales and marketing and what is a qualified lead.
And people are kind of used to waiting for stuff now, so it's not so bad. Like, once upon a time they order online and expected to show up tomorrow. It's like, no, it's never going to happen, right?
Yeah, especially after last year with everybody, all of those trends being pulled forward 10 years and the uptake in online shopping being what it is now. It's all the more important.
So let's touch on AI for a sec before we get, because I want to come back around to Google and all sorts of stuff, but we'll come to the end of it. We'll talk about what's happening in Google in Australia, I think. But with AI, and I can't remember much of your presentation, to be honest, back when I originally saw it, because you see a lot. But I do remember something about Google Images, and you spoke about AI stuff. And so I remember something about that stuff, and I don't know. It's probably come a long way, because I think it was a couple of years ago I saw you speak about that.
Yeah, it is changing very, very fast.
It's probably come a long way since then. So what's your kind of take on AI now?
So if we break it down, because there's a lot of different definitions of AI, and the bit that we're most interested as marketers is really machine learning, which is a subset of AI. So AI encompasses a lot of things: robotics, natural language, all sorts of stuff. But machine learning is building machines that can learn by themselves. So instead of having to be explicitly taught, and the way we've done that for almost a century now with any kind of machine, is we give it code, right? So think about the computer that you're looking at now, or the device you're looking at now. Think about how your washing machine works, how your TV remote works. It's like, if this, then that. If this button is pressed, then
crazy. Really think about it. It's crazy. The zero,
but 90+% of all code, essentially, if you boil it down, is kind of if this, then that.
Yeah.
So humans, engineers, have had to codify what needs to happen, like what's happening in the real world, turn that into a whole bunch of rules. And then sometimes those rules conflict, and sometimes those rules get very, very complicated. If this, and if this, and if this, and if this, but not that, then do this thing. Google used to be built this way, right? So the Google search engine, the results that you saw were based on a whole bunch of rules. And by about 2011, they'd got up to 4 million of these rules. Every single one had to be hand-coded by a little geek somewhere. And it would be, if you are looking for, trying to think of a sports team that's got multiple places, the Hawks, right? Okay. If you search for Hawks, if you're in Melbourne, you're probably looking for the AFL team. If you're in Atlanta, you're probably looking for the basketball team. And anywhere else in the world, you're probably looking for information about birds with big beaks. So there is a rule there dependent on the location. And then Google started adding rules for the device that people were using, because we want different results depending on the context of the situation. Yeah. And then time of week was considered, and the weather was considered. They even tested if the phase of the moon had an impact. It didn't, but they tested it.
There you go.
So all these rules
astrology.
Each other. Yeah. And then Google tout this misleading stat all the time, but something like 15% of the individual searches that people do every day, Google's never seen before. We're weird, right? I used to have this slide I would put up on the wall of like a Ducati motorbike and say, write down 3 words to describe what's on the screen. And then another slide with like a beautiful, like high-heeled shoe. And different people use very, very different words and phrases and terminology to describe exactly. It's the same picture. All 50 people in the room are seeing the same thing. But then we'd go around the room afterwards and people are like, you wrote down what? Or there wasn't much overlap at all. Like sometimes you'd get a word and like maybe 10 people out of 50 had all written that word, but then the other 2 words they'd used were completely different.
I guess it's the experience, right? It's probably coming from your experience.
Weird.
Yeah.
Well, it through your own lens and your life experience and what that means to you and how much you need that thing right now. People are weird. And so if we're all searching differently, and a whole bunch of the searches that Google sees every day it's never seen before, how the hell do you build rules for that? And this amazing, the smartest guy that no one's ever heard of is this guy, Andrew Ng. Surname's NG if you want to look him up, Andrew Ng. And he was the guy that introduced machine learning to Google. He now owns Coursera. He's run the AI department at Baidu. He's gone on to build a bunch of AI companies, but he was the guy that really sort of brought machine learning to Google and pushed really hard. And they didn't take much notice at first. frankly, and which is odd, right? Because you think Larry and Sergey, they've always been into AI. It's always been about creating this intelligent engine. But he had to really push, and it was, by showing what it could do with the translation app. You remember how bad the translation app used to be? You take something from English, translate it to Italian, then you put the Italian back into English, and it was garbage that came out the other end. And it was machine learning that was the step change in that tool. And now, of course, machine learning is in every Google tool. It's in Google Docs, it's in Gmail, it's in YouTube, it's in everything that they put out. So machine learning is the machines basically writing their own code, is another way to think about it. Like, they are coming up with the rules. So think about how a toddler learns to identify a cat, right? Toddler points and says something, and we go, oh, that's nice, dear. That's a cat. And the next time they look and they point and they go, dog, and we go, no, dear, it's not a dog. That's a cat. And eventually, after 4 or 5 or 6 goes, they see a cat and they go, cat. And we go, that's amazing. Well done, little one. Pat them on the head and they go, oh. And that's called reinforcement learning. And that's exactly how the machines learn. It's just that the machines need 10,000 examples for the most part, not 4 or 5. They're a bit thicker than toddlers. Yeah. And that's really what learning is, right? Over time, we get more and more nuanced. We're able to go, oh, that's not a cat, that's a kitten. Or that's not a dog, that's a Labrador. Or, we get more and more nuanced, and we start to categorize things differently in our heads. The machine is kind of doing roughly the same thing, but it needs a lot more examples. But we don't have to explicitly give it the rules, because you try doing that. We don't do that with our kids, right? We don't sit down and go, right, today, Johnny, we're going to go through the checklist of how to recognize a cat. It's got a roundish face, 2 pointy ears, often has a bushy tail.
Yep, a bit vague.
And we have incomplete information, right? We can tell that's a cat even when half of it's hidden behind the couch. The kid still knows that that's a cat. But the computer gets freaked out about that because, well, where's the fluffy tail gone? It's only got 2 legs, not 4.
Yeah, something's missing.
Behind the couch, But how would you write the rules of if this, then that? And the engineers have struggled with this for a long time. And a lot of these things were considered sort of undoable until fairly recently, where now machine learning, you give the machine enough examples and it learns by itself how to do the thing. And the most famous example of that is probably the game of Go. Right. So you remember back in 2016, Google's sister company, DeepMind, a company they bought that was making no revenue, and they bought it for $500 million. We'd all like that sale.
Good work.
No customers, no revenue, $500 million.
Come by me for $500 million.
Yeah. I'll say something. But they bought 110 of the best AI minds on the planet. That's what they wanted. They wanted the talent. They didn't want the company. They were playing Atari games at the time. They were teaching these machines, or the machines were learning, I should say, to play these Atari games just by looking at the pixels on the screen. Mental when you think about it.
Yeah.
And where they're up to now, and what they've just come out with literally in the last few weeks, this thing called Mu Zero. Look it up. I won't go into that yet, but MUZERO, Mu Zero, is mind-blowing, where they've come in just literally in 4 years from that machine playing Go. So quickly on the Go thing, it's the world's most difficult, most complicated strategy game. 3,000-year-old ancient Chinese game, more board positions than there are atoms in the universe.
Okay.
A few years ago, it was considered unthinkable that a machine would be able to play this game. Why? Because it's a game that requires intuition. You can't brute force your way to the end. With chess, you can look at the board position, and you could, if you really wanted to, work through every possible next move, and then every possible next move off that, and then every possible next move off that. And you could work out statistically what's the best move to make right now, and you can brute force your way to the end. You can do that every single time and work out the best move. You can't do that with Go because there are just too many moves. Gotcha. And if you ask a world champion Go player, well, hang on, why did you make that move there at that point in the game? And they'll say, I don't know. It just felt right. My intuition said that was the right thing to do. So how the hell can a computer play a game that relies on creativity and intuition? Well, Google DeepMind solved that 2 years after being bought by Google, with all of that power and cash and compute thrown at it. They took on the best in the world and they beat him 4-1.
Wow.
And then they built a machine. So that first machine was built by feeding in lots of examples of how humans play, because like chess, right? All the geeks, they write down their moves every time. And there's centuries of data. So they feed all that into the machine. And that's how the machine got good at playing the game. Then they made a new machine and went, actually, we're not going to tell you how humans play. We're just going to give you the rules of the game. And that can be written in 9 sentences.
And then you figure
that machine learnt how to beat the previous machine, beat it 100 games to 0.
Wow.
Because it just taught itself how to play.
So it's a smart
new thing, Mu Zero, just to close the loop on Mu Zero, that can play Go better than the old machine, and it doesn't even get taught the rules of the game.
Oh wow!
it just watches what goes on. It gets told if it's made an illegal move.
Yep.
Like, is this allowed? And it gets told if it's won or lost the game at the end. That's it.
Wow.
And it's able to learn how to play without being taught the rules of the game, which, if you think about it, is a lot like real life. Like
how humans learn chess, right? You learn chess by losing.
Yeah. Or marketing. You learn how to run a Google Ads account by trying different things, and hopefully you make your client profit, but sometimes something doesn't work, and you learn from that, and you go back and next time I won't do it that way because that time that didn't work so well. But we are terrible at that.
Yes.
We did things once and it didn't work, and we go, oh no, don't do that. No, don't eat strawberries on a Tuesday, because when that happens, like, then
too much information. Usually it's too much information coming into that decision that's actually irrelevant.
Yeah, or we make decisions on too little information, or we decide that something was important, but really it's not. The fact that it was a Tuesday when you're allergic to strawberries doesn't make any difference. I think strawberries on Thursdays, you'll also come out of a rash.
Yeah.
That was a random example. So the machine, it's fair to say, is getting very, very powerful. Google continue to tip huge chunks of money into DeepMind, paying for the now 1,000+ employees. I think they lost something like 700 million on them last year, or the last financial year that we have a P&L published for. Why? Because they know that machine learning and deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning, and deep reinforcement learning is what they're playing with now. But that is the future, because they know the future is not us idiot humans sitting around trying to figure out, how do I make this decision? What are the rules that I'm using in my head to make this decision? And then trying to codify that into a machine to say, if this, then that. That clearly isn't the future. If you give the machine enough examples, self-driving cars, we cannot code for every possible thing that can happen. If it's raining sideways and there's a tree there and a cyclist does this, the car needs to figure out what to do by itself in that situation.
Wow. Because I understand that Google, when you hit I'm not a robot and you come up with those images, someone told me that those images, that what you're doing there is actually helping the machine learn, because you're actually, you're sort of crowdsourcing machine learning by the fact that everybody fills out that capture, says, oh, this is not, and some of those are really bad. It's like it's trying to teach the machine ultimately what not to, what's
it's basically helping label the data that is then used to help train the machine. So yes, there are whole sets of these images that are used for machine learning, and the machine now, in terms of image recognition, is basically as good as a human, right? Because we think we're special, right? We all think we're special snowflakes, but we're not perfect. We're fallible, and there are some images that Google share.
That's why we have car accidents, right?
Yes, a huge number. I mean, alcohol's involved in that too, but a huge number of, and self-driving cars are already safer than humans. But of course, it's just the regulatory side of things. When a human makes a mistake and someone dies, we all go, "Oh, that's terrible," but carry on. Yeah. When a machine makes a mistake and someone dies, then everybody is like, "Who do we sue? How do we do this? How do we stop the machines ever doing this again?" But the number of mistakes they're making per million miles driven is a lot less than humans, and ultimately, we will live in that world. I don't know if my kids will even have to learn to drive. I will probably teach them anyway, assuming there's a car around.
Probably good luck to get a steering wheel, right? You're probably even good luck to even get a steering wheel. But I mean,
it will happen.
In Western Sydney, they put a new rail thing, the largest rail system I think ever constructed, and it's all completely automated. There's no drivers.
Right.
And there was a big uproar about it at the time, right? And the reality is they built the train stuff either underground or above ground. So the chances of running anything is pretty slim. Like to get up to that thing to commit suicide would be pretty hard. So you need like a rope and everything to get up there for starters. So the chances of making a mistake are pretty slim anyway, but basically all self-driving cars or self-driving trains. And when they first released it, the train got confused and went forward too far. In the first station, the first day, there was thousands of people going on this train, right? And everybody got on the train and the thing went over too far. So no one could get out, right? Because it miscalculated how it stopped. So it back up. And as soon as they did that, they actually pushed every single train 20 minutes out. And in the end, there was like thousands of people stuck on the train for 2 hours while this train they were trying to get the train to stop at the station to let people out.
Right.
So it was interesting.
That probably isn't a problem with AI. That is probably a problem with the engineer that built the rules that told the train what to do. They were trying to tell the machine what to do. And if you miss, this is the problem with expert learning models. If you miss one of those rules, if you're trying to describe this whole sequence of events and if this and if this and if this and if this, but not that, if you miss one of those things, the whole thing goes out.
Yeah.
But if you let the machine learn by itself, if you give it enough data, then it will end up in most situations being better than the human. The caveat I have for that though is that in its narrow tasks, right? The machine are getting very good at this little bit here. So yeah, trains is a perfect example actually, John, because self-driving cars, well, you know,
too many
can go
parameters
anywhere and there's too many parameters and anything can happen. But that train ain't leaving the rails.
Backwards and forwards, exact same trip, exact same people.
Code for that. Yeah. There are stations, there are bits in between. Like it's pretty easy to turn that into a list of rules, but it was a list of rules. It wouldn't have been true.
Exactly. And I think what happened too is they tested it for months and months. So we saw trains going backwards and forwards up there, you know, like we used to call the ghost train because there was no one on it. And they did this for months and months and months, worked perfectly. But what they didn't, I looked up, you didn't factor the concept of how long it would take for people to get on the train because they would stop and take off in a couple of seconds, like, right? I'm thinking, you guys didn't account for the fact that people could get on this train.
Or the weight.
Or the weight of the thing, right? So all those parameters, I think, screwed them up in the end when they went live. And because they went live publicly on the launch day,
news crews,
you know, like news crews there, everybody stuck in the train. And it's like, whoa, bad for the government. Like, now you screwed it up, right? Because the trains don't even let people out or let them. So it's quite funny that, so I think that whole machine, you're probably right. They've done some parameters, but they never actually thought about, what they should have done, I reckon, was they should have run a very light day where they said, look, so many people can get on the train. Let's just test it with people on it. Right? But no, let's just make a big announcement and that 40,000 people get on the train and see what happens.
But it always bloody happens, right? When humans are involved, everything runs late, it runs over budget. I mean, I'm sitting out the window, I'm looking at this, another rail project that they're building here in Melbourne. They're digging tunnels underneath and all these new stations going. This thing's been outside there for 2 years so far, and I think they've got about another 5 to go or something. And it'll end up being billions over budget because somebody would have sold it into government going, oh no, it only cost 2 billion, it'd be fine. And it'll end up costing 10 because they'll be long gone sitting on the Caribbean island by that point.
Exactly.
It's not their problem. So ultimately humans will be better at this stuff than
actually,
what they're really good at is prediction. If you boil it all down, really what it comes down to is prediction and predicting the next little thing. And the cost of prediction is falling. The accuracy of prediction is going up. And the speed is obviously shortening. When that happens, we will allow the machines to make more and more and more predictions for us. But a decision is two things. It's a prediction mixed with human judgment. So the value of human judgment will go up as the cost of prediction goes down. But they're starting to be able to predict more and more things. Again, if you narrow the parameters and put the machine in a nice little box, then it's very good at predicting what's next in that little box. It can't do everything that we as humans do yet, but that's what DeepMind are trying to solve for. And that's the big thing that they have. What's their mission statement? Something like solving intelligence, I think it is.
Okay.
It's a pretty big kind of
big deal, right?
Kind of a big deal. But if you're saying predict, I mean, like writing code. So this is a bit meta, but engineers are now using AI to help them write the code, because if you write that statement out and it says select case brackets, like most of the time the machine is able to predict what the next word should be. And so it starts popping, just like you use Google Docs, right? You start typing and it predicts the rest of the sentence and you go, oh, that's actually correct. And you
Well, I wasn't right.
and you come to the end and you start writing the next one. And the more you use that, the better it gets, because why? You're giving it more data. And so it's better able to predict what you want to do next. And so these things are going to start to edge into our world. It's happening with Gmail and Google Docs. I notice even on my iPhone, and I don't think Apple are near as good at AI as Google, but when I swipe down, let's see what happens now. But when I swipe down, like the next, or those apps that pop up at the top of the screen, they are context sensitive. So like when I do that first thing in the morning, the weather app is almost always top left. But if I do that in the afternoon, it's not on there. It's something else, because it knows which apps I use at which time of day. It's just trying to predict which app I might use next. And I don't know how much, you probably didn't want to spend this long on AI, sorry. But
no, it's all right. It's all very interesting.
Well, GPT
it's got big ramifications, it's
huge. It changes everything. I know that is a phrase that your listeners have heard before, and it's often used in a very hypey situation, but AI, machine learning, will change pretty much every single industry. What we don't know yet is where and by how much. Like if Hollywood and the news media that we were talking about before we got on air will have you believe that, robots are going to kill all of us.
Yes.
And they're going to replace all of our jobs. I think it's much more hopeful than that. I don't believe they replace all the jobs, but the machines will certainly replace some of the tasks that we all do every day.
But don't you think that money will need to change? Well, because if you've got, say, 7 billion people on the planet and 5 billion have nothing to do, how are you ever going to sustain yourself, right? Because humans need hope, right? They need, because it's interesting. I read the story about the other day.
Creative expression. Exactly.
So you got a situation where, like, if you get a job, right, you get a promotion and you feel very excited about it, and it lasts maybe a day that you got this promotion and it drops off, right? So okay, I got that promotion now, move on. What's next, right? So you always want something else.
Yes.
And so you're never happy, right? Humans are never happy. So it's really funny when you think about it. But the reality is that how would money even matter or exist when that comes to a point where everything is kind of like, it's almost like this utopian thing where you have to think about, well, is it change the way it works, and does it reset wealth? Does it change, because money becomes meaningless?
And that won't be a cliff that we all fall off of, and then here we go.
Gradual.
But it could be utopia, it could be dystopia. I mean, if the machines start replacing a lot of the tasks, arguably there's a whole lot of work that a whole lot of humans do right now that humans should never have been doing in the first place. I mean, standing in a factory, moving that thing from there to there all day. Yeah. I wouldn't want any of my family.
Well, there's no hope. There's nothing there. There's nothing. You're not improving your intelligence or your brain or helping yourself at all. You just become a machine, right?
And so, yes, and we're not robots. We have all of these attributes that robots don't have, that machines don't have. We should be celebrating, embracing the humanness and the humanity of this, and using the machines to augment us and enhance us and allow us to get out of the bloody factories and stop doing those tasks. And every job has bits of tasks like that. So what I've been urging people to do for the last 4 or 5 years is to take a very hard look at the stuff that you do. Do a task audit. That was actually one of the things we did in eMyth. If you've been through that, you probably have that, right? Piece of paper, 7 columns, one for each day of the week, and every 15 minutes, write down what it is that you're working on.
Be a lawyer for a week.
Audit yourself. Yeah, you're right. Judge yourself in 15-minute increments. But get very clear on that and start thinking about, well, okay, so maybe a machine can't do it today as far as we know. But a few years ago, the best AI minds in the world thought that a machine couldn't play the game of Go. Now that's old news. And that grandmaster that they beat, he's now retired because he's gone, there's just no point playing this game anymore. I will never be able to beat the machine. What's the bloody point? Which is a bit sad when you think about it. He was the best in the world. He'd beaten everybody. But he did go through this period too, interestingly enough, where by watching the way that the machine played, he actually learned new ways of playing. He thought he was the best in the world. He thought he knew everything about this game. Decades it took him to get that good. And now all of a sudden this machine comes along and plays in a completely different way. It was like playing an alien. He's paraphrasing what he said. It's like an alien intelligence, an alien species. But he learned new things from that. Well, who are we to say that the way we do it now is the best way? It's just the way that we've always done, or it's the way that we've done it within the constraints that we have. I was listening to a talk the other day by a guy who is in 3D printing. And I will get this horribly wrong, apologies, but essentially the way that we tend to design stuff is we design for the way that we can build it today.
Yes. Which
is, depending on how you build it, it's bolting different things together, or it's starting with a big lump of metal and then cutting away. It's subtractive, and we end up wasting 90% of that lump of metal. With 3D printing, it's additive. You're only using the bits you need, and there's no waste.
And there's no connections.
But once you, and you can print groups of parts now that
apparently Tesla does that.
Were basically impossible to.
They print the entire frame of their car. Basically, there's no bolts or anything in the framework.
Is that right?
Yeah, they didn't. Apparently, it's all one piece.
I thought they were just getting rid of rivets to make it cheaper to build.
Yeah, no. Apparently, actually build this thing in one complete thing.
Right. And again, so there's all of these different things, and it's the convergence of these different things. When you've got augmented reality, and we're all wandering around. Google Glass tried that; they were just way too early.
Yeah.
There are people now sitting at desks working that don't have these screens in front of them. They might have a real keyboard and a real mouse, but the screen is actually being projected into their eye. So if you want a bigger screen, you just flick a button and just upgrade it. Ding, done. And they're sitting there coding on virtual screens. Plumbers right now, let's take a weird example, right? For those that are yelling at their podcast device going, this isn't going to affect my industry is different. Plumbers, right? Okay, how is AI going to affect plumbing and augmented reality and all these things we're talking about? Because I think for the past few years, a lot of parents have said to their kid, like, shit, don't go and be a paralegal. Like that's a great way to get replaced by a machine. Go and do something with your hands. Go be a plumber. They're getting 150 grand a year right now. Like they won't show up at your house for about 3 weeks. Good problem recently, can you tell? I love plumbers at the moment.
Fun plumbers, aren't they?
But if you could go, instead of a 4-year apprenticeship, if you could go on a 2-week course to be taught the basics of what are these tools, what are they used for, and how do you use the tool? And then you go out to a job, and on the screen in your head, it is not virtual reality, right? So it's augmented reality. You're looking through at the real world, but overlaid on that, like a heads-up display in a car, is another
instruction manual, if you like,
showing you what's going on. So the instruction manual, and it's saying undo this bolt first, and then when you turn to look at your parts kit, it points and says pick up this part, and you grab that one. It says put this one in here, twist it halfway, don't tighten it. Now do this thing over here. Now tighten that and do this bit. You could be a plumber, quote unquote plumber, and solve, let's say 80%, maybe 95% of all of the jobs that need doing,
because they're all the same,
with 2 weeks training. Because the intelligence is built into the device.
When a plumber comes out, 9 times out of 10 is the same thing, right? They're fixing it.
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to stand there and go, oh, mate, I think this is going to cost you. So you have to go to school to learn how to do that. And then basically the rest is done.
Yeah. No, I think it's crazy, because I think the thing is that with an entrepreneur too, is the biggest problem is that you look at something like Uber or those sort of those ones that have come out of nowhere, supposedly because the incumbents haven't thought about it, right? So I've actually buying a new car. I bought a BMW, and the technology of that car is quite amazing. Like, it can actually replay your drive. Like, you can go forward 50 meters, press a button, it can reverse back exactly the same way you drove in.
Wow.
Right? It can even it's all this pedestrian detection, but if you go to change lanes and it realizes there's a car coming on and you ignore their warnings, it corrects you back and puts you back where you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
You can even do a 3D out of your car and see your car, which is a 3D element of everything going around. We're actually sitting there and there's paper on the ground flowing on. I could see it on the paper off the side of, like, it's a crazy kind of stuff they're doing. But I said to them, but you guys, because we look across the road and there's Tesla across the road, they're setting up. And I said, you're just going to get beaten by this giant iPhone.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, we are. We're scared. We're scared that we're going to lose our jobs, because eventually it will just be the thumbprint. You buy a car. You won't have to go to a place. You won't need us, right? We'll be gone. So they're now worried now about the car industry and the way it's moving. That's got big reflections on mechanics. Like the Tesla, you don't need a mechanic. You don't need to get car serviced. All those industries suddenly go away.
And advertising and marketing, right?
Yeah.
Peter Diamandis talks about this a lot. Like, when my AI is talking to your AI and they're talking to BMW's AI and Tesla's AI, and my AI understands all of my preferences because I have given it permission to watch and listen to everything that I do. That scares the crap out of some people, but bit by bit,
yes.
we might get there, because look at what's happening to privacy, look at what we give up in terms of convenience, like bit by bit, 20, 30 years from now, that may well happen. But if my AI understands me and all of my preferences and is able to somehow understand, all of the ways I'm going to use this car, say, then why do I need to sit in front of a TV at night and be bombarded with cars driving down empty, windy roads in New Zealand somewhere to try and convince me that thing's better than that? Yeah. My AI will have a chat with their AI and go, yep, okay, that's this one. Right, now what can you do about price?
What color do you want? And so, it's crazy stuff. So
every industry is going to be affected because every industry has decisions and predictions and data. I mean, a lot of that data isn't surfaced yet, isn't sort of widely known. But even like factories, if you go to a factory and they last upgraded anything 30 years ago, just by putting some sensors into that factory and starting to gather some data, you might be able to tell, oh, that part wasn't made correctly, or this machine's about to break because that rattle that only Jim can hear. Actually, a sensor could hear that and could tell you that machine's going to break in the next 3 weeks unless you do this. And
I mean, there's monitoring systems where they monitor traffic inside stores and they can figure out how long they're going to stay and when they're going to buy and all that sort of stuff. So it's figuring out all that buyer behavior.
And the Amazon stores, you can just pick a product off the shelf and walk out. Go through a checkout because the camera has seen who you are, which product it was, and has charged your card before you get a meeting.
And you look at that retail environment with Amazon. I mean, I went to a couple of Amazon stores when I was in America not long ago when I could actually travel, and their store is completely different bookstore to a normal store. Like a normal bookstore in Amazon is not like a normal bookstore. It's like walking through Amazon. It's like, the most widely read books you might like. All these things, all completely differently organized in the logical way that you would go in a bookstore. Rather than going to a traditional bookstore, you go hot new releases, top 100, and the rest are kind of like randomly put in sections.
Like the Dewey Decimal System, basically.
Which you basically just randomly walk through and then you walk out and buy a book. But if you actually said, no, and you'd like to read this, and I mean, with Google Glasses, you can almost just about say that anyway.
It's a Minority Report, right? We will see that version of the world that's designed for us, filters out the crap that we don't want to see or our AI doesn't think we want to see.
Yes.
There's all kinds of downsides to that, but that's another hour.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to get into a little bit of Google stuff because it's a big concern, and I think it's also about privacy. I think one of the things that sort of scared me a little bit was if you go to an iPhone and you look at the Facebook app, and Apple's now forced people to actually, or forced app designers to actually place in what privacy things they do, what data they select. If you go into the app and just go into the app, Facebook app, and just scroll down, you'll see a thing about what data we collect. And when you get into that section, you drill into it, you can scroll forever, almost like you can scroll and scroll. So all this data they're collecting on you, and that's becoming a privacy issue, I think, because a lot of people are now starting to think, oh, no, I don't want all of them tracking me. And the reality is they're not tracking you. Really, they're just tracking you as a combined unit of other people like you so they can, sell it. They don't care about you as such.
So you ads against it,
Yeah, exactly. So we can do something against it. But then you've got the thing that happened in Australia, which probably everybody knows about by now, is that, government's saying, look, Google must pay for news content on their search. And we're talking about the concept of, Google threatens that they will pull out Australia in search if they don't get their own way. And government said, well, no, we're getting our own way. You can do whatever you want. So it's a bit of a shootout going on now. And we spoke about the concept of, is Google really that serious about doing that or not? And
I believe they are. Yeah. I believe it's not an empty threat. My understanding is that, and probably by the time this goes to air, we may know because Parliament sits what for us right now is next week at the time of recording, February 15th to 18th. It could well happen in there that it gets discussed, so could even get passed into law that quickly. I think because of the amount of press it's getting, it will get tabled pretty early on. And if Morrison plays hardball and says, no, this is what everybody says we should do, we're going to go with this code the way it's written now, which Google have said, we can't possibly comply with that. We cannot give some people advanced access to the algorithm. I mean, that just shows how little the person understands.
Well, it's like your black box, right? You don't give out your black box.
There isn't an algorithm. There are hundreds of different algorithms. Most of them are being updated multiple times a day. A lot of it's run by AI, which, remember, nobody's writing the rules anymore, right? The machine's writing its own rules, and trying to get the AI to explain to a human what the rules are is virtually impossible. So it's kind of impossible. And they've said, look, this is impossible. And it's not an empty threat. They will leave Australia if that happens. It won't be immediate. Obviously, there'll be a timeline for that. My understanding is at this point that it would just be Google search and maybe Google Maps. There's a bit of uncertainty around Maps, but it wouldn't be YouTube, Gmail, Google Docs, BigQuery, all of those other tools that we all use. Thank God, because I don't want to go back to Word and Excel ever. I love Google Docs and Google Sheets. But it is a ridiculous code. I totally get that there is a problem, and someone like Google does have monopoly power, 90+% of search in the world, and they take a bloody big clip on the way through for all the people that go. But we go to Google instead of Bing and Yahoo and Census, bless them, because it's so much better than all the others. They built the best machine, so we all go there because we get the best answers from that. And yes, they have to be not penalized in some way, but they need to be regulated in some way, and they're trying to get ahead of the regulation and sort of play mea culpa before they get told to by governments. But this one is heating up for sure, and we were chatting a little bit before we got on air that the reason it's not an empty threat is because they have to protect their business model at all costs. And they'll happily give up 4.6% of their total revenue. Or sorry, it's 4.6 billion that they do in Australia. So it's not 4.6% of revenue, but they'll give up that 4.5 billion in order to protect their business model in all those other countries, so that all the other countries don't go, oh shit, do you see what happened in Australia? Maybe we should try that. But they won't try that if it means Google leaving Australia and then that government getting voted out next time because we're all pissed off that we don't have Google anymore.
Can't Google anymore, yeah.
And think about all the small businesses. I mean, there's close to 2 million small businesses in Australia, certainly more than 1.2 million. I don't know the exact number these days, but how many of those are reliant on the traffic they get from Google? I know that sounds self-serving because we're a Google Ads agency and we help people get found on Google, but that's just the paid side. Then there's the organic side, and all those SEO agencies are absolutely terrified right now of what happens if Google disappears. Where would we all go as consumers to go find the products that we want to buy? Do we use Amazon more? Do Bing and DuckDuckGo step in? But then if they step in and they become 90% of search, then they have to comply to the same laws, at which point they go, this is untenable and we're leaving now. Well, it was a good run while it lasted.
Thanks so much.
Who knows? There are so many unknowns there, but it is a very real threat, I believe.
And I think the biggest problem is that it'll get to, when it becomes political, it becomes a problem where if you back down, you look like you've lost, and then they can't handle that either. So it becomes a showdown of egos in the end of the day because they may not want to back down. And I think perhaps Google hasn't probably said this, but I mean, they're probably talking about the general people that do searches, the general market. But as you say, the small business operator or the person who runs Google ads, they're the ones who are going to get affected by this dramatically in a time when they least need it. In a post-pandemic scenario where we've done it pretty good here, we're trying to recover, and then you pull the rug out from under the business to be able to sell anything to anybody.
And then you've got Facebook and Apple going at it, and Apple is really coming after both because they don't need ads to survive, and so they're hanging their hat on the word privacy, which is forcing Google and Facebook to, we better talk about privacy too. But we don't really want to. We don't really want to because now we have to change the way we do ads. And they're coming up with all these crazy acronyms like FLOC and FLEDGE and Turtle Dove and all of these things the engineers are inventing to help protect privacy while still allowing advertisers to serve ads to the people they want to serve ads to. It's going to be an interesting year.
I think maybe we got a bit bored last year, decided to start stirring things up. Maybe that's what happened.
They all worked from home and they just went, shit, let's make things interesting.
So it's really cool to talk to you. I think we sort of probably didn't exactly end up talking about what we were talking about, but I think AI has so much ramifications of so many different things. And I think one of my friends in America who's very big into like helping large sort of name people, and one of the things he says is that, are you an alien? So what his idea is that some people think differently. and they're probably aliens in his opinion, right? That they didn't really, you know what I mean? And so it's a bit scary. But the idea is that you look at things like Uber and things that were created, and you think, well, how did you even think of that when the incumbents couldn't think of it, right? Same with the motor car industry. I was talking to my son the other day. I said, can't understand why BMW couldn't have invented a Tesla. There's no reason they couldn't have. They didn't. Why not? Because they don't get it.
Same with Kodak and cameras, right? They're so invested in keeping things the way they are because that's 98% of their revenue, and they don't want to do anything to disrupt that they can't allow themselves to think. But Jobs did it, right? He created Skunkworks and said, like, your job basically is to put that lot out of business. But he had to keep them separate in a separate building down the street, separate people. And it's a great question. It's a question that I've been asking of businesses for about 5 or 6 years now, but how do you become the firm that puts yourself out of business?
Yes.
Like, what would you have to do to put yourself out of business? What kind of firm would you have to become in order for that to be possible and force yourself to
because that's what will get you,
thought
right?
experiment.
It's what gets you.
Someone's going to do it. Someone's going to put you out of business, right? So it might as well be you.
Yeah. At least you make some money on the way out, maybe, because you can see it coming, right? Worst case, right? Get out before you can.
Maybe you're the taxi company that creates the Uber instead of getting replaced by it.
Because they won't get together. I think that's part of the
company
problem.
is going to die at some point, and unless you constantly innovate. And most businesses aren't able to innovate enough to keep the old business like continually improving. It's sort of like this one comes and then dies. If you think of, like, if you picture those S curves sort of stacking together, the trick is to kind of jump off this bottom S curve and jump to the next one just as it's starting to go up, and then jump off the top of that one just as you jump onto the next one. And that's kind of what success as a business looks like, is being able to
know when to jump,
chop and change, and not stick your head in the sand and go, well, this is the way we've always done it, so it will always work. Oh yeah, maybe it didn't.
I think the upside of a small business now, an entrepreneur, is they can change the direction quickly. They can pivot. Big corporations couldn't easily pivot, and so without dramatic changes, and technically probably go broke in the process because they just can't cope with it. Where a small operator can pivot and change direction and doesn't affect too many things at once, and they can do it.
So I'll push back on your American friends' alien thinking, because it's not always like the thinking of the new idea. It's not always that they didn't see it. Like Kodak invented digital cameras. They just didn't believe, because of their lens that they were looking through of the billions of dollars they were making from film. They didn't believe that it would ever make a dent in this multi-billion-dollar business, because it was, 13 pixels by 20 pixels back then, and that's ridiculous. So they could think it, but they couldn't picture the future far enough to be able to realize, that hockey stick growth, or that exponential growth, and how that new thing would replace the existing. So I think they are able, maybe that's the alien thinking that you need, is to be able to think it through and what could happen in the future. Because I think a lot of people can see what might happen next and what's over the next hill, but can you jump 20 hills into the future and run that far ahead over that horizon and go, oh shit. I think that's what the best entrepreneurs do. They build for that, even though that isn't even possible today. I mean, and Musk is probably one of the best at that. Neuralink, which is this new project. I remember reading an article about it maybe 3 years ago, and it wasn't physically possible to do half the things that they knew they had to do. But, Musk is like, he's just like, well, that's a problem we'll fix.
Yeah. And and he just does it. Like, I've actually listened
absolute certainty that, we'll hire the best minds in the world at doing this, and they'll figure it out. We'll just
crazy, because I was
throw more people and more money at the problem.
That he actually, that there was a biography written on it, so he didn't actually necessarily authorize it, but it was talking about the way that Musk runs, and I seriously doubted anybody ever really want to work for him, because he's a nightmare. But apparently, he basically puts unrealistic expectations on the outcome, and knows they're not going to achieve it, still berates them for it. But then at the end of the day, they've achieved in half the time, because his idea is that you don't have the time to wait. You've got to get this done now. It's got to be done next week. It's got to be done.
Huge urgency, because otherwise, we are going to kill this planet probably the way we're going.
My
daughter reminds me of that all the time. And good for her for doing it, because it's old blokes like us that apparently have given up. Our governments and our leadership has given up trying, it seems. Let's not go there.
No, that's probably another couple of hours. But I mean, I think that's the thing is, but coming back to the concept of thinking about where you are now and looking at automation is some of my biggest thing in my business. I try and automate everything. So anything that I can find that I don't have to do again, like people say, I'll just get a VA to do it. Well, the reality is half the time, yeah, that's employing people, but half the time that VA is not who's going to do it right.
Or they're going to keep doing it the same way for the next 3 years.
Or leave you and then someone else comes along, right, and screws it up. And so having that kind of automation and thinking about how you can make your business work better, and I think automating sales is probably the best money you can ever spend, because if you can do much more at the front end of that process and at the back end of that process, and humans obviously often need to be involved in the middle because they don't want to buy from a machine, but having that automation to build out that as much as possible to deliver quality people to talk to. It's kind of what I do with my interview process, because what we do is to get to an interview and then you've got to fill out a form, you've got to go through a process. Then I show up to the call. Hardly anybody ever not shows up. And at the end of the day, people don't ring up trying to sell me something. So I always thought that if I open my calendar up, people would, have all these people trying to sell you something. And it's like no one's ever done it because they won't go through those steps. They're too lazy, right? They don't want to answer those questions because when you get on the phone, it's kind of like, oh, you just lied to me. You just lied your way in here. It's not a great place to start a conversation. So it's quite interesting how you can kind of put barriers in your business to stop people from talking to you. I mean, I have the thing, I don't answer the phone, and people laugh at me. And they said, seriously, you don't answer the phone. You rang me before and I didn't answer the phone, right? Because it's silent. I don't listen to it. It's not important to me. Yeah. And I reckon they'll do something else. They'll get to me if they have to, right? Yeah. And so I think
if I don't recognize the number, I'm not picking up.
Because phones are the most distracting thing ever, right? People answering the phone, and so I think thinking about your business, thinking about automation, thinking about how AI is coming, and it won't be something just show up tomorrow, will it? It'll be so gradual.
And let's make that final distinction. It's a great place to tie it all back together, is that automation is not the same as AI. No. And most businesses don't need AI today, but they do need to be implementing that automation. They don't need AI yet. And by the time you need AI, you're not going to have to go hire a bunch of data scientists to build neural networks. It will be like taking Lego pieces off the shelf. There'll be this pre-done bits for us.
Service.
Your job as the entrepreneur then is to, how are you going to put those Lego pieces together? What do you want to build with it? What kind of prediction do you want? And how do you want this thing over here? I was telling my daughters the other day, like by the time you get to high school, you're going to have to press a button and that essay is going to get written for you. And the teacher won't be able to run it through some plagiarism checker because it will never have been written before.
Yes.
But what the machine is able to write will be probably better than you can write. Now, I don't want you to do that, but I know you're going to.
Yeah.
So, but how do you use that then to make you a better student, to make you a better writer? You can get 5 different versions of an essay, get some ideas from it of how you want to write yours, maybe steal the odd paragraph, but you still need to understand what it's spitting out, still be able to argue for and against, all of those things that you do learn at school or university. You can't just press a button and hand that in without reading the thing, but you can use those tools to help you get better at being a human. I mean, ultimately, we should celebrate that and
the plan, right?
The humanity and the creativity and the strategy and love and empathy and all of those qualities that make us human. We should lean into that and help use the machines to help us get there faster.
Yeah, it was so interesting. Just the last thing I saw a video of a guy that's doing this AI thing where basically what happens is they input the text of the video. So it's a personalized mail merge email essentially, but the video is personalized and the person's actually not real, but he looks real, sounds real, and actually reads the text of what you've just sent as the mail merge and sends a customized video to you, talking to you.
Yep.
Right. And when you look at that,
he uses that for his sales page and has been using it on a sales page for the past 2-3 years, and people are blown away by it.
Yes.
You can type your name into a form and then this video is going, "Hi, John, because blah, blah, blah." And he's been using that for a while. So
so it's a simple example, right, of something that So I think if Google still exists in Australia, get in the search some AI stuff and find out, because I think that's the thing, it's a crazy time, but I think that's the thing, is opening your mind up to it. I think, baby steps to start learning it.
To be thinking.
I mean, I was blown away with BMW with what they could do with the car after 3 or 4 years. But they focused on tech inside the car and AI inside the car, but they haven't necessarily, like their hybrid model was like useless. Like, look, you haven't done anything here, people. Like you really haven't done nothing. So I think that's the thing they're trying to do. They're trying to fix the AI side of it and automate that part and make that the point of difference, as opposed to trying to build an electric car, which I think is wrong, because you can easily do it. So anyway, we better stop. So thank you so much for your time. What's the best thing that people could do to get in touch with you? Like, we'll put up their website address and stuff like that, but what are you kind of looking for in terms of, our listeners say, hey, I'd like to talk to Mike because,
Well, there's two businesses that we have. So websavvy.com.au, that's the done for you agency. So if you're running Facebook ads, you're running Google ads, if you're spending a bit and you think it can be done better, or you'd like a second pair of eyes over your account, and we'll give you an honest assessment of how it's being run. And there's probably 1 out of 9 times I look at someone's account and go, whoever's running that for you, keep going. There's a couple of minor bits there, but keep going. A lot of times we look at those and it's a disaster, and we either give you a shopping list to take back to that person, say, why is this being done this way? And we do a full audit, or just, send me a note. So that's at websavvy.com.au. There's heaps of places on there to get in touch with us. On the training side, there's AgencySavvy.com. So that's where we train a whole bunch of our competition, frankly, other agencies, in-house.
You try to push yourself out of business.
I'm a teacher at heart. I can't help it. That's my creative expression. I think the world's a big place, and I think abundantly, and there are plenty of sharks in this business and plenty of crappy agencies, and the more good agencies can come together. I did a Q&A call with a bunch of members this morning, and they're all wonderful people running wonderful businesses, helping a whole bunch of other businesses, and the more we can help create that, the better off everybody is. So that's where we talk about stuff like AI and Google ads and Facebook ads and Data Studio, Google Shopping, YouTube, and all of those things in sort of paid digital marketing. So a whole bunch of courses, but then monthly Q&As, and we have a very, very vibrant Facebook community all around that. So it's a closed paid group, but some really interesting discussions in there. So if you're interested in learning more, AgencySavvy, if you want it done for you, websavvy.com.au. Or just ask me a question. I love talking about this stuff, clearly. I love answering questions. So find me on either of those websites, drop me a line and ask me a question.
Really great. Thanks, Mike. It's a privilege to talk to you. I really appreciate it. And I think it's probably something I've been on my list of talking to different sorts of people. And I know when I saw that AI stuff, it kind of blew my mind. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
No worries.